Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And now I'd like to welcome Alex Skorik as he delivers another beautiful teaching. I don't know what he has in store for us today, but it's all connected to the foundation. And there's so many things that we need to know, but I think little by little, step by step, we're achieving more and more and absorbing more and more. So thank you, Alex, for continuing to join and support this North American Corona team meeting.
Thank you very much, Mark. I also want to add to the disclaimer that YouTube has put certain conditions also. And so it is not my intention to distribute on YouTube. So anybody who wishes to do that does that on their own accord. But we do respect YouTube's wishes regardless. And so I want to welcome everyone to the North American Corona team meeting. And it has become quite an international event, as we can see. And I'm very happy to notice that there are new representatives from North America and from South America and from all over the world, really, because we are becoming one nation. So today is a very difficult subject. And I've had some trepidation about discussing it because there's a word that's called taboo, and for different people it has different meanings. So we find that those meanings have somewhat changed. So what I see as a taboo is not a taboo for some people, and what some people are doing I see as a taboo. And unfortunately, we have conflict. So how can we have conflict when what we're trying to do is to have the science and the soul of man meet for the purposes of peace? So the peace is, shall we say, anti-conflict, but not to be accused of hesitancy. I want to welcome everyone from around the world. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. This is teaching on plasma science. We are discussing basic knowing. The subject today is religiosity. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is October the 24th, 2021. And this is a presentation of the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So I also want to compliment the Spanish community who is doing simultaneous translation in Mexico and the rest of the Spanish community. And we all know what an important day it is today. As we know, in North America, we have NFL football, and of course in Spain, we have El Clasico. And so it's a very, very important day in the universe notwithstanding the fact that we are 21 months running into a confounding problem. And today is actually the last teaching in this basic series. I started with basic teaching October the 14th, 2020. The Brazilian community urged me to begin this teaching, and it has turned out to be extremely fruitful. And I want to compliment the Brazilian team led by Rafael and Darian. And you can witness this every Friday night, and you can see the tremendous progress that is happening there. So these teachings were originally designed for new students and for mature students because we wanted to condense the thousands and thousands of hours of teaching that is in the archives. And we want to somehow create a bridge between those who have no idea what we're talking about and to those who are already on the leading edge. And the link between that, of course, was the basic understanding. So we went into basic teaching, which has to do with language. We have a basic understanding to see what those terminologies mean, and then to see the basic knowing, which is we are going through a paradigm shift. And normally that, of course, takes a generation. Well, this generation is only going to take not 20 years, but maybe a couple of months. And so we are all going to be going into quite a shock. And so you can see by the subjects that we've covered in this basic knowing series. And I had a lot of discussion with myself, trying to figure out what the purpose of this was. And one of the things that was bothering me...
¿Me escuchan? ¿Están hablando de que esta es la última clase?
One of the things that was bothering me with these classes is that we keep on getting these questions that show that there's a confusion between what is the physical reality and what is the plasma reality. And this is understandable because these subjects here, starting with physics and chemistry and going on to religiosity, are all things that we have been taught all our lives and reinforced on a daily basis. So there has been nothing to compare it to it. But now we do have something to compare it to. And as such, we have to understand that it's not that we discard this, but we have to add to the knowledge. But in order to add to the knowledge, we have to understand what it is that we're adding. And so today's class on religiosity, very difficult class. And frankly, I can't talk about it frankly. I have to stick handle around, which is
Alex, you just cut out for a moment. Okay.
So, oh yes, here we go.
No, you're good now.
It's okay. We have been experiencing problems. So anyway, the thing is that there are things that we can talk about that are available in the mainstream. And it's just a matter of connecting these things. And that's what we're talking about, basic knowing. We're talking about creating a bridge. Mark, I'm still registered as having some trouble. Are you hearing me?
Oh, yes, we see your screen and your voice is coming through loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, in Canada here, we're experiencing a lot of oppression, and so people have decided to abandon the streets and everything, and so there's been a lot of pressure on the internet network, and so that's one of the things that I'm experiencing here. And of course, we have it's football season, so you understand what most Canadians are doing. But what we want to do is cross this bridge here, because we started with the basic teaching, learned about the basic understanding, and now how does it apply as the basic knowing? So I'm taking a lot of liberties today because this is the last class on this subject, for me anyway. And I will pass the talking stick to other new teachers. So we start with terminology because the terminology is important, as Jalal has said. So we discussed the basic systems of magnetic and gravitational relationships. Okay, well, this is good. And we understand that by going through different geometries, we start by moving into a monatomic state. And then we can go through other dimensions through different gradients. And this creates a dynamism. So the basic teaching had to do with Gantt state. And this is all natural plasma, and it all has to do with energy and motion. So energy is always positive, but the direction has a charge. And so a charge is energy in motion. We have to look at systems on this planet that are physical to teach us. We have to have a way to verify and validate, because we are not all scientists and we don't have all the equipment that we need to verify and validate, you see, because this is something by definition of what science is the verification and validation by man-made means. So we don't all have the equipment and we don't all have the skill. What we all do have is our presence on this planet. And so we have to look at how things manifest on this planet. So we see that the Earth has a lot of energy paths. And we're going to talk about some of those paths a little bit later. But basically, energy comes in and goes out. But in order to stay, it has to go around. And if it doesn't come in or doesn't go around, then it just goes right on through as if we're not even there. So this is the basis of the magnetical gravitational field forces, which we call repulsion and attraction. Now, repulsion is basically manifest as an emission, and attraction is manifest as an absorption. And the range of operation is between, for us, between the ground and the sky. And so how we perform within this range is determined by susceptibility. So we now get a chance to use our terminology in context on this planet. No voodoo science here. It's all there for people to see plainly and vividly. But we have to understand that with the terminology, there's been a lot of double talk, double speak, obfuscation, and in fact, misinformation. So when we look at susceptibility, we have to understand that something is something. Nothing is nothing. So what does that mean? That means something is always something as opposed to being something else. And so what does that mean? Well, we have water. We had elements that we put in the water. We created a gas. We created a rotating field. And then we created a hole in the gas. But there's nothing in the hole. Well, how can there be nothing in the hole that creates a hole? So we understand that if you want to have your foundation of understanding, then you have to understand what you're seeing. And if you're from Missouri and seeing is believing, then when you see a hole in your gants, you better believe it. And then you have to rationalize it. Not my problem, your problem. So what we try and do is to teach. And so these scientific books, as presented by Marantavakal Kesh, The Universal Order of the Creation of Matters, and that is the book number 1. And we find that it is bringing fields together. And then there's a communication of these fields, and that is book number 2. And that communication is via the structure of light. Oh, really? A structure of light? Isn't that an interesting concept? And then, of course, we come to book number 3, which is the origin of the universe. Well, how can the origin of the universe be book number 3? Shouldn't the origin of the universe be book number 1? And so this leads to some confusion. So let's clarify the confusion here, because the universe is created from energy, and the energy is always in motion. So when the energy comes together, you look at the cover of book number 1 and you see the creation of matter. But this creation of matter is the drawing together of 3 different energy field strengths. And they come together and they present a field strength, and it appears as a universe. But it is actually constructed of 3 different field strengths. And then that field strength and its position is determined by another field strength that is created the same way. So now you have on the right-hand side 2 field strengths. And 2 field strengths cannot be the same. They have to be different. They are unique. And we know that because there's 7 billion of us on this planet, and we are all unique. And we have over 70 trillion cells in our body, and they are all unique. So all of those who are very good at math, please multiply 7 billion times 70 trillion. And don't bother using your calculator because you don't have enough digits on the screen to figure it out. But all of these cells are unique. So when we look at the creation of principal matter for the purposes of this discussion, we understand that energy is always in motion and is coming through, whether it's through space or on Earth, in the form of PM ticks. And so these PM ticks also have a substructure, but when they come together for a reason. And that creates an interaction of different force fields. And it is this interaction which creates a Maglev condition. And this Maglev condition is the essence of creation. But when we look at creation, we have to understand that there are different points of view. So the Earth has a point of view, and our body has a point of view, and we have a point of view. So now we're seeing that, well, there's something in the background here, and we kind of wonder what that is. And so we have discussed a lot of subjects which classify everything, but now we have to discuss religiosity and see if that answers the question. Before we get into that, let's just review the basic principles of plasma science. This has to do with magnetical force fields. They are called attraction and repulsion. So there are 2, not 1, 2. And the combination of these creates a Maglev condition. And so we have 2 effects of this Maglev condition. 1 is natural creation, and 2 is natural decay. The word creation automatically connotates something that is new, something that is made. How it's made, we're not discussing. It's just that it's new. Whereas natural decay has a connotation of a rottenness, and it's not the same. Natural creation and natural decay are a 2-way street of the same thing. Both are natural creation because both involve an exchange of energy, and both are evolving from a Maglev condition. And so one evolution is the emission of energy, and a second evolution is the absorption of energy. So the creation or the decay is the residue that comes from the basis of a Maglev condition, which is really the combination of the attraction repulsion forces coming together. So when we look at the natural decay of a neutron, we see that a neutron breaks down into an atom, which consists of an electron-proton combination, plus the release of a PM tick, which is a ray. So therefore, when you look at the mathematics of a neutron, we find that it's missing a few components. And so we found that when we did the neutron math, that it wasn't adding up. But for the purposes of discussion, we say, okay, well, the neutron decays into an electron-proton combination. But are we discussing what creates a neutron? So really, the position from a neutron is always a creation. So the creation can be into a higher energy state or a lower energy state. It's just that we differentiate the higher energy state as saying that is natural creation, and the lower energy state is the natural decay. So in fact, the creation of our bodies on this planet is a product of natural decay. And you always have to supplement, because if you fail to supplement, you will continue to decay. And if you are really bad at maintaining your body, well, we'll find that the aerobic bacteria within your body will transform into anaerobic bacteria and eliminate your physical problem in 9 days, as it's done in what we call roadkill. So we now have a different kind of knowing, and this is a knowing by connection, because you cannot possibly know everything, and you don't have enough time to look at all the subjects. And it's a lot of fun to look at all the subjects. I agree. It's a lot of fun to go to university. It's a lot of fun to go to school. It's a lot of fun to gain knowledge. But each of the subjects that we talked about the past few weeks is a career, is a life career. And so we don't have the time to put all these things together and then move forward. So we look at the basics in life and try and understand that we have energy in motion, which we call PM ticks, and these are magnetical forces. And we have a MAGRAV condition, which has your basic 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z axis, which are your gravitational conditions. And what is the difference between the magnetical and the gravitational condition? It's a point of view. And that point of view is the midpoint, what we call the transition point. And we as souls are in that midpoint because we are none of these 3 dimensions. You cannot be part of these 3 dimensions and then be an observer of these 3 dimensions. And not only that, but you cannot extricate yourself from these 3 dimensions and go into a non-dimension and still be an observer. So we are in another dimension. You have to take that into account. So when we discuss in physics the observer-participant relationship, we have to understand that there is a transition zone, and we are part of that transition zone. And how does that play out? So when we look at the principal matter, we find that the principal matter is the bringing together of the antimatter in the force field, and the convergence of these matters comes into the physicality. And there is a transition zone, which we call the dark matter. These are all plasmas, but so are the PM ticks, which are traveling through the universe. And so these PM ticks are looking for convergent forces to come together, and they will come together through a common denominator. And I didn't say lowest common denominator, a common denominator. And I didn't say identical, I say common. And one of these common denominators for us is Earth. And so there's another force field that our force field interacts with. And so our force field of the body interacts with the Earth's force field, and that is called inertia. And so this field interaction of inertia is specific to the transmutation into the physicality. So when we look at attraction and repulsion, so we understand that it's gravitational convergence or magnetical divergence. And what causes this residue, which is over and above the basic attraction repulsion forces, what causes this residue to change is something that is independent, and it's variable, and it's attached to free will, our free will. That is the independent variable. But does that mean that the independent variable is independent from the universe when the universe is interdependent? So all fields interact and this reaction is manifest through its position. So therefore the position within the universe is dependent on other force fields. So the universe is interdependent. So how can you be independent if you are interdependent? Well, that sounds a little confusing. Well, let's clarify the whole thing. We have to look at the environment. And so when we look at the cups of life and what is their impact on our life, we understand, well, they were introduced specifically for the pandemic, which now we're into 21, 22 months actually, and we still haven't found it, despite the fact there's 13,000 people who are spending a career trying to find this answer. And I'm only talking about the scientists, I'm not talking about the rest. So these are not the cups of pandemic, they are the cups of life, because this is how the life works. So we as plasma scientists have been able within our homes to do something that, shall we say, is independent of prestige or position in our society or money. We all have enough money to build a cup. And the first cup has a zinc plate, a copper coil, and a nano-coated copper coil. And I repeat this because we all need to be teachers. And we sometimes, our students only give us 35 seconds. So be quick, be concise. We create a magnetical field and a gravitational field. And then we create a second cup and we just substitute a copper plate. We still have the magnetical field and the gravitational field. So we have two different cups that work the same. But the sameness is the magnetical gravitational relationship. The difference is one is emotional and one is physical. So if we're still dealing with the pandemic, please keep these apart by at least a meter, because the force fields that are within the cups of life do not see the limitations of the glass of the cup of life. They go beyond. It only takes half an hour if you are recently hit. But if you're a long hauler, then it would take more. So this is all part of the teaching. And once we're finished with that, we understand that we can do more. And so there's a relationship with these cups we call the cups of man. Now, by putting the two cups together, we actually create one force field, one magnetical field, one gravitational field, and we basically create a home for the soul. And so each cup, therefore, has a magnetical gravitational field with the soul. And the combination of the three cups come together, have a magnetical gravitational field and the soul. Oh, okay. And then we introduce the cup of inertia, where we nano-coated two copper coils and a copper plate, and we still have the magnetical gravitational field. And then cup of inertia interacting with what? Well, the cup of the earth. So we have changed one thing. We now have introduced nano-coated zinc coil and a nano-coated iron coil with a nano-coated copper plate. And We still create the magnetical gravitational field. Okay, so when we look at the ceramic cups of life, how do we know what is the difference between the teacup and a ceramic cup of life? You know, we're all investigators, right? We're all detectives. So how do we do this? And what do we know about the ceramic cup of sweet and the ceramic cup of pressure and the ceramic cup of life? So we have one of the sciences, which we haven't really discussed in great detail, but we see that archaeology is a science where we like to find out what was society like in our history. And was it royal? Or was it religious? Or really, was it just adults playing in a sandbox? And if this is supposed to be a teaching, how come I'm asking so many questions? Well, we got to ask more questions because we have to know what questions to ask, because the answers are not acceptable. And why are they not acceptable? Because they are not answering the question of the creation of the universe. So where is the center of the universe? Well, we at one point thought it was the earth. Well, what is the center of the earth? And so what better place to find this than at the Great Pyramid of Giza? And an interesting thing is that the latitude and longitude is roughly 30 degrees. So we find that the geographical center of the earth is at 30 by 30. And what is the history of this concept? And so we find that a gentleman by the name of Charles Smythe in 1864, who was an astronomer royal for Scotland. What? Just a moment. Was it royal? Or was it history? Or what does it mean exactly? And then you find that the Archaeological Society is also royal. And then you have to look at the ownership and say, well, who owns? So please feel free to do your investigation. But what I'm going to talk about is the hieroglyphics, because when we look at the hieroglyphics in these archaeological digs in and around the pyramids of Giza, we wonder, are these monuments paying homage to a pharaoh? Or is it graffiti? And if it's a graffiti, then are these monuments nothing more than idolatry? Well, one of the telling tales, and we like to tell a lot of tales, is the Sphinx. And you wonder, there's the head of a man on a lion. Well, who does that? Like, haven't you taken biology? Don't you know the difference between a man and a lion? What kind of creature is that? And why would a lion be at the position of the Sphinx? And why would a Sphinx be at the position of the Pyramid of Giza? So really, the lion is a zodiac designation. Well, a zodiac designation is 2,160 years. Who keeps track of a 2,160 year calendar? As we're coming into the age of Aquarius, leaving the age of Pisces. We know that we were in the age of the ram and the age of the Apis, which is the bull. And we know that as we dig up these archaeological digs, we find that there were cone heads And they weren't just on a Saturday night TV show. And there were women who were rulers in the past. I'd say that's one of the things about the archaeological societies. It's a society for men only. So it's a society for men to write the history of man. But Nefertiti was a woman, and she had a funny hat. And I wonder if she was a conehead. And enough of that subject, because we're at the crossroads. We are in the process of identifying what are the chains of man and how do we unchain man. What does that mean? Well, that means is that we are in the process of a jailbreak. And so this jailbreak is regarding the freedom and emancipation of humanity. Well, isn't that what we've been trying to do in history when we've been all fighting for peace and trying to understand the soul? And isn't that what religion is all about? And so we look at the cups of the soul, and when we bring all 5 cups together, we find that each cup has a magnetical gravitational relationship, and each cup has a soul, and the collective unit of all 5 cups have a magnetical gravitational force field and a soul. So then what is religiosity? And which religion is it? Because there's more than one. And which Bible is it? Well, there's more than one. Well, which God is it? This is getting repetitive. Which Lord is it? Which soul is it? Which belief is it? I keep asking questions. And is it a religion if it professes war? Is it a religion if it promotes deception? Is it a religion if it practices idolatry? So I'm not exactly sure. But what I do know is that you're asked to believe. Believe! So we have to understand the biology of belief. And as Bruce Lipton explains so beautifully in his book, The Biology of Belief, the question really boils down to very simply, do you believe your experiences, or do you experience your beliefs? And so today in my community, it's raining. And for some people, they would say, what a lousy day. And some people may say, oh, what a great day. We will be cleaning up some of the mess that we've created. So what is your point of view? And does your point of view matter? And does your point of view matter to beyond you? Well, so these are, again, more and more questions. We're trying to answer these questions. And what better way to answer these questions is to go to an encyclopedia, because these are books of knowledge. And so we found that, well, you know, there's one encyclopedia called the Encyclopedia Britannica. And then there's another encyclopedia, which is kind of interesting because this actually brings up a religious connotation, and it's called the Roman Catholic Encyclopedia. And well, if there's a Roman Catholic encyclopedia and there's more than one religion, shouldn't there be other encyclopedias? So why just 2? Well, we're going to get back to this question because we have a third one, and it's called Wikipedia. And what's interesting about Wikipedia is this is a free content encyclopedia online. And this is where the world can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. How cool is that? And where did this name come from? Well, it's a Hawaiian word, wiki, which means quick. And it's combined with the word encyclopedia. So we have quick encyclopedia or Wikipedia. Well, how does Hawaii have such an influence? See, I've never been to Hawaii, and so I don't know where it is, but I know that it's a very tiny, I mean, like an extremely tiny place in the middle of the largest ocean on this planet. And so you wonder, this island in the middle of nowhere has a lot of impact. And let's look at the kind of impact that Hawaii has. Notwithstanding the wonderful guests that we have on this panel here, who are doing tremendous work with the plasma science. But let's look at Huna. Huna is an ancient teaching, thousands of years old. And it comes from infinite wisdom in Hawaii. Isn't that interesting? And what the Huna teaches is the teaching of the three selves. Not me, myself, and I, but the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, and the higher self. But what is so interesting about this is that missionaries arrived in Hawaii in 1819. And what was interesting about this is that they were talking about mental health. And the Hawaiian kahunas had a highly developed system of psychology. And what is interesting is that the missionaries tried to impose their religion onto that of the Hawaiians. So my question is, how come the Hawaiians didn't try to impose their religion on the missionaries? And this is not the first time that this will happen, as we will find as we go through this. But to discuss the Huna just a little bit here, because it's a very extensive topic. And what you'll see is that there's a tremendous connection here between the soul of the body and the soul of the man and the creator. So we have the conscious mind, which we call the Uhuhani. And I apologize if I don't pronounce it correctly. And then we have the unconscious mind. And the unconscious mind is the Unihipili. And the Unihipili means grasshopper. Okay, so, grasshoppers jump from here to there. Where do they go? Well, maybe they look at the higher self. And so this is the higher conscious mind, and called the Amakua. And these are connected. And to understand how these are connected is the study of the Huna on the little island of Hawaii, in the middle of nowhere. Well, how and who taught these people to do this? Because what we do know is it wasn't the missionaries. Now, there's another religious group called Spiritists, and they were not shown on Wikipedia for whatever reason. But Spiritists have a different kind of philosophy. And so when we're dealing with psychology, you dare not say that you have a headache, because where the Spiritists will cure you is they will cut your head off. So you really have to be careful what you wish for, and you really have to be careful what you say, because the Spiritists take you literally. You see, there's no other way, there's only the truth. So, when you start to do double speak and double talk and double cross, they don't understand that. And so when you say your wishes, You have to wish for what you want, not what you don't want. And to give you an example, so there was a gentleman who was learning about the religion of the Spiritists, and he wanted to get back home, but he had a wish, and he wished that he had a car. And the Spiritist asked him, well, what kind of car did you want? Oh, he says, well, I don't care what kind of car, I just don't want it to be green. Spiritist said, okay. So they keep teaching him, and eventually he managed to find his way home. And funny enough, in his driveway was a station wagon. Oh, okay, well, he was kind of thinking more of a sports car, but anyway, there's a station wagon, but it was green. And so he was kind of, upset with that, which he shouldn't have been upset, because he wished for a car and he got a car. So what difference does it make the color? But the thing was, not doesn't work. Not doesn't work. Okay? Because energy is positive. Energy is always flowing. You cannot stop the energy. You can grab a battery, but you cannot hang on to the energy in the battery. Okay? These are two different concepts. So one is a physical concept, and one is energy in motion. And so this is the whole purpose of these classes, is to understand the difference. And when we do understand the difference, then we understand the problems with the commandments, because most of them say, thou shalt not. And unfortunately for us humans, we don't hear not. So when we say, thou shalt not kill, that's not working, is it? So we are stuck in this sea of green, and we are in this yellow submarine. And so we have to figure out how to move on up, shall we say, move on up to the other side. But there's other religions. And so we find that Macumba is another religion, and it has to do with various religions of the African diaspora. And this African diaspora is also found in Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. And people kind of consider this some form of witchcraft or black magic. And it is basically, because what happens is that the person who practices in the dance of the Macumba is basically taken over by a spirit. And so they are not themselves. And so the question comes, which spirit? And how is that possible? And how can you give yourself to a spirit and still be active? And so we can answer this question very easily, because we all practice this kind of spiritual displacement. One of the bad ways to do it, of course, is via coma, because we find that the body is still alive and functioning, but it's not brain dead. It's just brain disconnected. And this is the same thing we do when we go to sleep. The body is still functioning, but the brain is not there. We don't know where it is. And we do know that the difference between a coma and going to sleep is that at least we know that when we wake up, it's usually within the next day. But in a coma, we don't know when that'll happen. But thanks to the plasma science, we have changed that around. So there's something that we know that we didn't know. And so we know how to do this. Well, how do we do this? Well, why are they still dancing the Macumba? And what is it then? What is witchcraft and what is black magic? And why is it black? And, what is the problem here? So let's just carry on and look at the history. And so we find that there are these witches in Belgium, and they're housed in Bruges. And in a medieval attic in St. John's Hospital. Huh? So the average medieval farmer had no way of reading this. So there's no depictions that are being shown. So one of the things about religion that is a hangover is that they say you need to be God-fearing. Well, one of the things that is, kind of causes fear is fire. And so one of the ways to discuss the history and to discuss transportation historically is to relate to something that is historical. So in our ancient history, we know with the Romans that we had chariots. So we didn't have sports cars and we didn't have magravs and universal enhancement units. We had chariots. And these chariots were said to fly in the sky. And so they did have some kind of flame, like a rocket. And so these were referred to as chariots of fire. And of course, they instilled fear. And it's interesting, if God is the creator and he created you, why are you afraid? And why do you want to be afraid? Why do you seek God? And the only way to seek God and put God in your life is to be afraid of him. It really doesn't make any sense. But there are things that, that have happened in the past that involve fire and brimstone and the burning at the stake, and of course, devil worship. And then there's this other kind of understanding that we have going back to Egypt now, where we talk about crossing the Bardo. Well, what is the Bardo? So the Bardo is this transition state between the living and the dead. And it's articulated in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And so basically what it does, it assists a soul who has just passed away to be able to cross the Bardo, cross the boundary, cross the limit, and cross into the spiritual world. And this is handy if you have the body and the body dies in your presence. But, if the body is not there, then you cannot give this rite of passage as outlined in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, because it takes several days. And so we find that there is a benefit to this, because one of the things that is associated with witchcraft, of course, is ghouls and goblins. And we know that, one of the most important days of the year is coming up, October 31st, which is Halloween. And ghouls and goblins really are souls that have not been able to cross the Bardo when they were relieved of their body. Which leads us to Tibetan Llamas. Oh, how did we jumped now from Egypt to Tibet? Yes, because you see, I had an opportunity to read the books of Lobsang Rampa, and he discussed Tibetan Llamas. And he discussed that in a way that was quite interesting for the Western observer. So someone like me, I don't know anything about Eastern religions. And I don't know much about religions anyway, but that's besides the point. The thing is, what the Lamas were doing was every day they would have all the monks come together and help the souls cross the Bardo, because every day people would die, right? People would die and they would need to cross the Bardo, and the prayers of the Lamas would help them do that, guide the soul into the spiritual world. But there were other priests in these Tibetan monasteries, and they were Shaolin priests. They were very disciplined, right? Very disciplined and very skillful. And so they used their powers, shall we say, to fight, physically fight. But in order to be qualified to physically fight, they had to overcome their limitations of physicality. In other words, to enlist the services of their spirituality. But these were elite Shaolin priests, right? And they were impeccable in their feelings. But there were other monks. And so the question comes, well, what are these monks doing? Well, funny enough, some monks were specialists in making cheese. And so monks in France, for instance, are very, very well qualified in making cheese. Well, that's pretty good, okay? Because that gives the monks something to do. But there were different temples, different monasteries, and different types of monks. And what was interesting in Tibet, that there was one monastery that consisted of warrior monks. Well, how is that possible? If the religion is meant for the peace and goodwill of man, then how can a religious monastery cultivate warrior monks? In other words, monks who are like soldiers, willing to fight. Well, what is the difference between a monk who's taught to fight or a Shaolin priest who is taught to fight? Or a martial artist who's taught to fight? Is he an artist or is he a fighter? And so these are more questions. And the reason this came up was because if you understand how lamas are created, and the head of the lamas, of course, is the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama has gone through many incarnations. And you find that the majority of the world believes in incarnation, reincarnation. And so this is a subject that we really don't understand very much about, and we don't understand how it fits in, but we're getting there. But the thing about it is that the lamas used a physical test that was a special physical test to identify the next Lama, the next Dalai Lama, after the passing of the Dalai Lama. So it's interesting that the Dalai Lama is mortal and would pass into the spiritual world, and then another child would be born who would be, shall we say, gifted with the qualities to be a Dalai Lama. And the only way to ascertain that is to ask a question of the child that only a soul who reincarnated would know. Well, that's the rule, that's the criteria. And I'm being very simplified in this. And so they managed to find, I guess, through 13 generations, new Dalai Lamas. And it's a very interesting subject, wouldn't you agree? And then I was kind of disappointed when the Dalai Lama came to Canada and he accepted a gift of money from an organization that had some dubious connections. And that really is the moral of this story, because when I discussed this particular subject, I got very depressed, because the nobility of being religious and striving for spiritual elevation somewhere, somehow is corrupted. And so the whole purpose of a religion is to be saved, because man has this plight. And in order to overcome this plight, we're told that we have to save the soul. Save the soul from what? And save the soul to what? More questions. Keep asking more questions. Well, Robin Hood didn't bother asking any more questions. He just went about a brand new business. Let's rob the rich and feed the poor, right? The equalizer. And one of his henchmen, of course, was Friar Tuck. Interesting, another monk. And of course, what they were trying to achieve was to provide for the welfare of man. Okay, well, this is all very noble. And, you know, what is interesting is, just to tell you a little story, you see, when we came to Canada, we came away from communist Europe. And so we came to Canada as a free country. But in the process, we had to go via monasteries. And so one of the things that really, shall we say, tainted my mother's understanding of religion was the fact that she was molested in a church. So, you know, that kind of really sours your religious outlook. And so when we came to Canada, she decided that the best thing for us to do would be to adopt the religion of the country, which I really wasn't sure what that was, and we were kind of guessing as to what that was. But what's interesting to note is that the way she wanted us to practice the religion was to adopt the religion of the country, which is kind of opposite to what we see a lot of new immigrants coming into Canada. They want to bring their religion and their society over here as well. And frankly, that causes a lot of conflict as well, because there's a divisiveness, there's a polarizing. And this polarizing is going through by saying, this is who I am, and this is who I'm not. Okay, so we create artificial fences. And so we now have then different religions. And so let's go back to the Encyclopedia, because the Encyclopedia is discussing this Encyclopedia Britannica. So Britannica coming from the, shall we say, the Britannica, well, what are we talking about? Britain. Aren't we talking about in English, kind of like an English encyclopedia, right? And then we find that there's a Roman Catholic encyclopedia. And I won't tell you the story how this happened to me, but I had a chance to compare the two encyclopedias. I didn't know that there was a Roman Catholic encyclopedia. I just knew that there was Encyclopedia Britannica. So why is there a religious connotation to this knowledge? And so when we look at the history, one of the most important times in our history is the Crusades. And the Crusades, of course, was for the fight against the Saracens. And of course, it was also the time of the creation of the St. John's Hospitalier. And there was a link to Montpellier and Rennes-le-Château. And then eventually there was a connection to the Jesuits. And so I'd like to just take a quick look at our history and see the connection. And so we find that the Order of St. John and the Order of the Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, and these are knights, like Knights of the Round Table, you know, British knights, and they're fighting in Jerusalem. And so there's a connection between the Crusades, the Crusaders, where they went, you know, the stories of King Richard and Robin Hood and King John, and we've all, you know, learned about this history. And of course, they were fighting, well, they were fighting the Saracens. And who are the Saracens? Well, they're primarily Arab Muslims, right? But there are Turks and Persians, and other Muslims are also referred to by the same kind of terminology. But basically, it's a Saracen is an Arab or a Muslim, especially at the time of the Crusades, right? So it's kind of a nomad, you know, in the Arabian deserts at the time of the Roman Empire. So, you know, this is going back way in history. But what was kind of confounding to me was that if the Crusaders were fighting the Saracens, then how come there were Saracens who were enlisted in the services of the Crusaders? I found this, you know, quite strange. And, you know, we even see that there are sports teams in Britain named the Saracens. So, you know, it just makes you wonder. And then there was another society, the Society of Jesus. Well, this has got to be really something. And it was founded in Rome. Actually, it was headquartered in Rome, but it was founded in Paris. Isn't that interesting? A couple of centuries after the Crusades. Okay, and why I bring this up is because as we came to Canada and I went to a Canadian school and we were trying to figure out which religion to work with, the one religion that stood out in all the expeditions, right? All the explorations, all the famous explorers in North America, Jesuits were always there. I couldn't figure out what that was and I didn't understand it. And you can investigate more on your own. But what I did find, not in the Encyclopedia Britannica, but in the Roman Catholic Encyclopedia, was Guy de Montpellier. And he is the founder of the Order of Hospitalier de Saint-Esprit. In other words, the St. John's Hospitalier. He founded that. And so he was from Montpellier. And it was an official announcement from Pope Innocenti III in 1198. And interestingly enough, 10 years later, Guy himself passed away in Rome. And what's interesting about Montpellier is the world famous medical university. And two of the graduates, as I discussed, Louis Pasteur. And of course, Antoine Béchamp was an introvert and Louis Pasteur was an extrovert. And so Louis Pasteur became the father of what we call allopathic medicine. And so when we make this connection, we understand why allopathic medicine is run like a military organization. All you have to do is just check the history. And as we're checking the history, there's another conflict. There's a conflict between science and religion. And so we find, for instance, in North America, we have an avoirdupois system. North America is basically an English-speaking continent. And it has a French-speaking measurement system. And the French-speaking in France and the rest of Europe have a metric system. And so this is kind of a conflict. So how come the French are not using the French system, but they're using a metric system, and the English are using a French system? And so we find that avoirdupois is a traditional system of weight in the British imperial system and the United States system of weights and measures. Okay, and it was first commonly used in the 13th century AD, interestingly enough. And of course, the pound is the standard weight that is used as a unit of mass. And we all know the difference between weight and mass as it is affected by the laws of inertia. Why do I bring this thing up? Is because there's a place called Rennes-le-Château. It has a massive population of 91 people, but it has about 10,000 visitors per year, and it is in France. And it is a prehistoric encampment, became a Roman colony or a Roman villa or a Roman temple. So it really, really goes back, way back. But it's a very important point in the history. And it was a very important traditional point with respect to the Crusades. And when you look at all the temples or all the churches in Europe, you find that there's something in common. we all know about magnetical lines of flux and field forces. And so when we look at a map of the Earth, sometimes some maps show ley lines. And what ley lines are energy lines, right? And these lines can be defensive or disruptive or restorative. These are energies. And they employ magic that is known to mortal wizards, right? Mortal wizards. But they can also cause people to move away. But the point is that these create a stable flow of energy. And so we find that there are focal points of these ley lines where they cross. And at these crossing points of these ley lines, these junction points, there's a church. And the temple, the steeple of this church, the point of the church, is of a specific distance from the other church, a specific positioning. And it was confounding for the longest period of time. And the reason for that is because in Europe, they used a metric system. And so what we find is that the distance between the steeples is avoirdupois. Miles. It is in miles. The distance between the churches is in miles. Who does that? Is the person who laid out the ley lines for the churches in Europe the same person who put the position of the pyramids of Giza at 30 latitude, 30 longitude? It's a question. And then we find that there's an AD and there's a BC, but in around 330 AD, there was a meeting in Constantinople, and it had to do with the First Council of Nicaea. So this was done in 325 AD. And the First Council of Nicaea was the creation and the formalization of the Bible as we know it today. And Nicaea is actually located in Izmir, which is the modern name of a Turkish city. And Turkey is home to all three of the, shall we say, the great revealed religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But 99% of Turkey's people today are Muslim. And Turkey's history is principally of that of the Islamic people. And yet, the Council of Nicaea was a council of Christian bishops. And Constantinople today is Istanbul, the largest city and financial center of Turkey. So we have different versions of the Bible. And so the Bible is one of the most popular books on the planet. And I thought it was the most popular book on the planet, so it was told. However, we find that that doesn't take into consideration the total planet. Okay, there's another group out there, and that group is involved with Buddhism. Okay, didn't mention that. There's another group, it's involved with Tao Te Ching. And the Tao Te Ching is the most popular book on this planet. So, as I say, I don't know all the religions, but what I found out was the Lao Tzu in 571 BC, when he was born, he wrote this book, and it is the most read book on the planet. So I said, well, I don't know a lot of things, okay, but one of the things also that I didn't know, I don't know about Mitra, and I didn't know, about the burial in the Vatican. So there's a lot of things we don't know. But we do know that in Roman mythology, Romulus and Remus were twin brothers. And one twin killed the other twin. There are similar stories in the Bibles, Cain and Abel. In the Roman times is Romulus and Remus. Then there's Enki and Enlil. And there's the eagle and the snake. And then there's Confucius and Hippocrates. And so if we look at the lost book of Enki, written by Zachariah Sitchin, whose skill was able to go between 3 languages. In fact, it's a Rosetta Stone, which goes between I believe it's between hieroglyphics, Hebrew, and English. Stand corrected. But Zachariah Sitchin could read all 3 books, and so he was able to decipher the lost tablets in Iraq, and he found the lost book of Enki. And the lost book of Enki spoke about the Great Flood. The Great Flood, which is recognized in 7 different communities around the world. And I mean right around the world. Same story, different language. And also discuss about the pyramids. Isn't this interesting? So we find that the most popular book was the Tao Te Ching. But one of his peers was Confucius. And Confucius was a Chinese sage. And we owe a lot of gratitude to Confucius because he helped bring for us the understanding of what needs to be confused. And then, of course, we owe gratitude to Hippocrates, who is the most outstanding figure in the history of medicine. And so we are grateful for him introducing to us the understanding of hypocrisy. So with the introduction of confusion and hypocrisy into our knowledge, we now have a basis of making our connections. And so we find that the first thing is that when we have a point and we have another point and we connect the two, and that's how things work in the universe. But the same points are the same. So in other words, if the one point is here and then that point is over there, it is the same point. And it has to be in 2 different places at 2 different times, because the same point cannot be in the same place at the same time. So that is where we have the energy flow. But if one point leaves a point and another point comes in, that's a different point. And that point is different. And that's the difference. So there's no 2 points that are the same. And so when we connect bridges, we have to understand that the bridges are between points to points, but actually they're from here to there. And so the going from here to there, what we've tried to discuss in these very, very basic classes is the terminology to understanding, and then to go from the understanding to knowing. But do you know all the details? No, you don't. So you have to make some connections. So one of the ways to make a connection is through a common denominator. Not the lowest common denominator, but a common denominator. And also by field strength. So there are more things to consider. So all things don't look the same. They kind of are the same, but they're not the same. They're common. So there are differences. We have to recognize what those differences are. And so the difference, what we are faced with, is to understand the domination of the matter plasma. And one of the reasons that I pursued this course of teaching is because of the domination of the matter state in its physical form. And we have not been able to discern the difference between the physical matter state and the plasmatic matter state. Fundamentally, we all know that we have a sense, and that sense is not physical. It manifests itself physically, but it is a plasmatic energy. And so that becomes the question, more questions. Which dominant matter state are you? And which common denominator are you, really, right? So we all want to, we all want to exceed our limitations, but we see now that, when we're limited and when we look at spirituality and religions, which religion and which spirit and which soul are they talking about? And do we just assume that they know what they're talking about? So we now know that we have a soul of the body, and this soul of the body is what governs man's conduct. And man's conduct is not working very well, right? Man's conduct is governed by an independent variable. And if that variable is limited to the inertia on this planet, then our limitations are indeed very limited. And so this is limited to a uniqueness. And this uniqueness is our point somewhere between what we have classified as the outer limits. And when you do that, then we automatically classify the inner limits. And the plasma science does not have limits. So when we define materialism, we have to understand that the materialism is actually the manifestation of physicality. And the manifestation of physicality comes through natural decay, a nuclear decay, but it is not rottenness. It's a gravitational transition of the reality. And we've put in proxies. The pursuit of money becomes our surrogate. And this is our surrogate that is a reality manifestation proxy. In other words, it's a pursuit of limitations. We have to stop pursuing these limitations because man has to look at the unique dimensions of man. So on this earth, we can transition between the ground and the sky, or we can transmit ourselves from one continent to another continent. And in our discussion today, we've gone around the world several times and visited so many countries, from the tops of the Himalayan mountains in Tibet, to the Amazon jungles in Brazil. And so we find that in our sciences, we classify vertical people. And in our sciences, we classify horizontal people. And in our religions, we classify men. And what is the problem here? We see variances. And as we summarize what we've learned, we see variances in our climate zones, extremes, desert to tropical, temperate to Arctic, freshwater to seawater. And these are changes in the climate zones. So there is a rate of change that now becomes the factor, because we see that there are mammals in the sea. Not all mammals, not all sea creatures are fish. Whales bear their children in the water, but so do humans, except that once the water breaks, then the babies come out into the air. So the rate of change becomes a factor. And can we change? And at what rate can we change? And so when our limitation is limited to our physicality, and we look at the range on this planet, when we look at one of the tiniest organisms, which is the virus, and the largest organism, which is the whale, and we see that range. And we say, well, how does that operate and where do we fit in that range? And so we find that all of this has to do with energy feeding. And when we look at the stacker unit as how we've created the individual cups and how we've stacked them up together, we find that the higher feeds the weaker, and that the higher feeds all of the weaker, and that we operate on the same way. But that's only part of the picture, because life and energy is always in motion, and it goes through energy packs. And these energy packs not only have a charge gradient, right? So that they have a direction of flow, but they have a gradient charge and the quantity of flow of force field. And that affects the lifespan, right? The vitality, the physical and emotional vitality. And that affects our ability to exchange energy. With what? With the spirit and with the soul. And are those two things the same? Well, if you are going to church and you don't obey the church will excommunicate you. Well, when we look at the church, we see that the church is inside that little tiny red dot in the bottom right-hand corner, which is our earth, which is part of man's universe, which is part of the sister universe, which is derived from the origin of the universe. And so we find that if we are excommunicated from that little red dot, where do we go? How can you be removed from that picture? Where are you excommunicated to? And who has the authority to excommunicate you? And so you find that there's something wrong with that thought process. And so it all boils down to the exchange of energy. And so we find that one of the greatest perversions on this planet is loosh harvesting. And we've discussed that in the past. And the one way to overcome this loosh harvesting is to understand that the universe is a benevolent place, and that the universe is a great provider, and that our little tiny perfect world is tiny but not so perfect, and that there's a whole universe waiting for us, but they will not tolerate a physical feeding system. So if we want to be free, we have to soar past the ego, and we can do that by being detached and at ease. So the plasma feeding actually comes not only from the soul of the body. We've seen in our science, we can produce the GANs, and the GANs comes from the thin air, doesn't it? And from that, we had a 5-cup system that we made as a stacker unit, but that is only one component. And we have not had an opportunity to really get into the cup of the universe, which is an amalgamation of all the 5 cups to work together as a unit. What we've done is we've looked at the physics, and we said, you know what, the physics is man-made. Then we looked at the chemistry, and we'll say, you know what, the chemistry is man-made. And so we take a physical inventory, not only of the components, but we take a physical inventory of the connections. And not only that, we take a chemical inventory of the environment. And not only we take a chemical inventory of everything and how it works together. And we relate that to our periodic table of elements. And the fact of the matter is, the elements are elementary. The truth is, the sum of the parts is greater than the sum of the parts. So knowing the details versus the details of knowing, you don't have the time to know the details. You have to make the connection, and this connection you do know, because the periodic table of elements is the physical manifestation of the creation of life on this planet. through the fields of inertia. And the way the periodic table of elements are done, we have the neutral elements on the right-hand side. Well, we're just going to switch that around, okay? So we have the gases of hydrogen and neon and argon as the center point, and we just brought over a couple of columns from the left side to the right side. Now we have a new center position, and we find that the copper and the zinc are on opposite sides of that center position. And so this center position becomes a transition zone between one side and another. But the thing is that there's a flow that goes from one side to the other. So if we were to say that the one side is magnetical and the other side is gravitational, then as we go around through the periodic table, the one magnetical side becomes the gravitational side, and then going back, the gravitational side becomes the magnetical side. Right? So we find that we have this, duality of hydrogen, where the hydrogen is on one side and the hydrogen is on the other side. And then we have a clear distinction between many of the elements that we bring in, and on the right-hand side, the many of the environments that we bring them into. Okay, so there's a combination that you're not seeing with the elements. It's just like when you bring your kit together and you want to play music, you know the notes, you have the instrument, you have the player, but do you have the music? The music comes from the integration of all of these forces, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to teach the convergence of this energy to understand how we, as plasma beings, we are going from different states to different states. We are gravitational. We are soul bound. Our existence on this planet is an interaction of the fields with the energy field of the earth. And so there's a transformation through this inertia interaction with the planet. So the planet becomes our mode of transportation, but within our planet, we have our own mode of transportation. So really, there has to be some kind of transmutation that goes from the plasma state to the physical state, you see, and we have to know the difference. And so we find that if we're traveling on this planet, that is in the small m matter state, very, very physical. But if we are traveling in our transformative state, that is very plasmatic. It's still in the matter state, but it's very plasmatic. And so we have two different types of transmutation, a transformation into the plasma matter state and a transportation system in the physical matter state. That's the difference. And so when we look at a watershed, we have to identify the difference between the windward side and the leeward side, right? We see which way is the wind blowing. And so when you're on a watershed and what you're looking for, we have to look for the missing ingredients because we have the evidence. What's missing? Is that what's missing? Is it moral or is it chemical? Is it plasmatic or is it physical? And then we've seen that Gans is doing some funny things that chemistry can't explain. How can gas become a solid? And therefore, these subjects are out of range when we're looking at the basic subjects that were taught with the conventional teaching. Nothing wrong with the conventional teaching. It makes an excellent foundation for it. So we want to add to the knowledge. But the thing is, what we have to understand is that the limitations that are imposed on this knowledge are gone on the leeward side. Okay, and we continue to go to the leeward side, and we have to say no. The leeward side is man-made, and it has to do with the study of nuclear decay. What we want to look is at the study of creation, the plasmatic side, the interaction between the magnetical gravitational fields, okay, which changes our direction. So as detectives, you look for clues and you find that evidence and then you examine that evidence, but you have to make a hypothesis on how you got there. So you can't limit yourself to just saying, seeing is believing. You have to ask the question. And one of the questions, of course, is why? But why is not the question. Why is the answer. It has happened. It is real. It's the lack of evidence that you're looking for, because the lack of evidence is the evidence. And so when we discuss conventional science, all the subjects that we've talked about, when they range from physics to chemistry, all the way to religiosity, are on the south side of amino acid creation. From the transmutation from nothing into amino acids is the migration from the simple and unstable to the complex and very, very stable. So what's the independent variable? These sciences do not answer that question. And we don't understand what's going on in our brains. We need to understand that, because this new science is answering the questions which have been bothering humanity for thousands of years, going back to before the pyramids, in fact, right? We're all looking for creature comforts. Isn't that what we're all about? So we have ideas which make us feel good. We have wishes which make us feel good. We have the courage to follow our dreams, and we love. We really do love. And that is the most powerful force. And all of this has to do with things in combination, because that's how plasma interacts. So if we understand the basics, and we're terminating the basics now, the magnetical gravitational pulling and pushing in both directions, and the balance of which we call a maggrav condition. And the direction of flow is the residue, and it has to flow. And this is how the energy within the cup's life, to understand what is going on in there, and then to move from there. We've seen the creation, we've got the basic elements, and from that, we created a zinc GANs, copper GANs, CO2 GANs, CaCO3 GANs, amino acid and water, the basics of life. And then we understand the new atomic math, because the old math has failed us. We know that because it doesn't add up. So the new math is the totality of the neutron plus the mass of the electron plus the mass of the proton plus the mass of the PM ticks, right? Plus the total mass of the matter, antimatter, and dark matter. If we can understand this, then we can understand our energy level, balance, and positioning. And that is the truth about the totality of the universe. And we can achieve that. We have already achieved that, okay? We have been experts at doing things that decay, but we have to understand how is that decay, and then where did that come from? And does decay come from decay? No, I don't think so. I think decay comes from a feeding. And so we're looking at a new type of feeding, not only feeding ourselves physically, but feeding ourselves spiritually. And so, yes, we all want to get back to nature, but you know what? That is also a fallacy, because we are nature. We are nature, okay? We are part of nature, and our conduct is limiting us to this planet. And nature is not limited to this planet. Nature is throughout the universe. So understand that when you are defining plasma to someone who is new and never heard this before, tell them plasma is a kind of energy state. And this is our ability now to transcend the limitations of science. And it is very important. How do you know it's important? Well, because we have a breakdown in our system. We have a transmutation which transforms our soul into our emotional state. And then we have a transmutation of our body into its physical state, the transportation with this planet on this planet. So you have the Earth as a transport vehicle that is hurtling through space. And you don't feel the rotation, and you don't feel the motion. And you can, as the Earth is hurtling through space, you can move on this Earth. Well, now we have a new capability where we can do the same thing that the Earth is doing. And so when we define manifestation, we have to understand there's a stacker reality and there's a universal cup reality. And all of this has to do with the reality when two fields come together, they form another. It is the formation of any field that we call the manifestation. And it's the plasma feeding that leads to this manifestation. So therefore, the manifestation could be non-tangible or tangible, could be non-visible or visible, could be dark matter or light matter, and of course, could be plasmatic or physical, but understand that the physical reality has a substructure of the plasma reality. So the plasma reality does not need the physical reality, but whether it's a plasmatic reality or whether it's a physical reality, either way, it's a manifestation, and whatever that manifestation is a form artifact. And so the emotion of presence is also a form artifact. And if you're an archaeologist looking for form artifacts, you have to understand that the emotion of presence is a form artifact of energy in motion. And so now we understand that our limitations, which are imposed on us, are really have to do with our viewpoints with respect to Earth. What we need to do is to figure out how do we transcend this, and that's why today's teaching on this physicality is the last teaching, because the vertical people understand this, and the horizontal people understand this, and us as matter state beings are just at the point of learning. And so we have to migrate from the stacker system to different types of systems. So we have vertical enhancement systems and we have horizontal enhancement systems, but now we have a problem. If we're on the leeward side and we say that that is man-made, well, these products are man-made. So what's the difference? The difference is the impositioning of man-made laws versus universal laws. So the role of man is to understand the difference. And the purpose of these classes, these last 6 classes, was for us to clearly identify the difference. And so if you don't know where you're going, understand where you've been. And I have also been guilty, because when they asked me as a child, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would have never told them that I would be teaching at the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, because what do I know as an 8-year-old? But what I would want to be was the choices I was given. Oh, you want to be a fireman, you want to be a policeman, you want to be a doctor. Well, you know, so these are all man-made constructs. But what is the role of man? Not all of us can be that. So what is our purpose? And so is there no purpose of being man-made? Is the fault, failing, and weaknesses of being man-made the tragedy? Or is the capability of being man-made an extra capability that angels don't have? Angels understand the universal laws. Man seems to have a problem. So therefore, if man's conduct is a problem, then we cannot engage with the universal community, can we? So it's not the problem of being man-made. The problem is understanding our role as humanity. And we do have a role because God is no fool. And there's nothing to fear about God, because God is the creator and created us in his image. And so we are creators creating. So now we have a knowledge versus a knowing. We know the difference. The knowledge is the details. The knowing is the combination of the teachings combined with the understanding, combined with the basic knowing. So there are gaps, and we need to bridge the gaps. Or do we gap the bridge by jumping over the bridge? Because you know what, when we go to the other side, we are operating in a higher order of magnitude, far more effective. And it's not that we aren't, it's a matter of being aware. And so today is the time to cross that bridge. I'm just saying that arbitrarily. You know why? Because we are in the pre-amino acid stage, but we are in the post-Lentz exhibition stage. October the 2nd, we open up. And now we're going into uncharted waters. And how can you go into uncharted waters without knowledge? So one of the things that we know is that we have energy binding systems on this planet, which are stealing energy from others. And it's most effective when you do deceitful work and double crossing. And so this is the abuse of the knowledge of man. And morality is the missing ingredient, isn't it? And so we find that there's another rule, and that is the cross you double cross is your eternal burden. And that is a horrible thought, because they say misery loves company, but you know what? The universal community does not love misery. So misery, if you love company, you will be alone. And that is how the ethics, the ethos of the universe works, because it takes into account the morality, the compassion, and the courage that is the essence of creation. And this is what we have to understand. So we are in the new space age, and we are part of that. And we have to now better understand the position of the universal cup and how it works, because the spirit and the soul are two different things. And so when we look at our physicality, that is our physical destination state, but there is a dynamic transfer state that now we have to take into account. And that is shown in the universal cup. And can we proceed now to understand that better? Understand this: what goes around comes around. And when you look at the Universal Council members emblem, it is not on Earth, it is not on space, it is wherever you want it to be. You know why? It's a universal council in the universal community, and we are part of that universal community. So remember, when we feed ourselves, feed our soul, tune into the energy of the universe, turn on to its source, and drop out of your limitations. You provide the pattern, you get the energy, so you decide, and you are the independent variable. And what is it that you're trying to achieve? First of all, the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute is putting this plasma science in the public domain. We ask people to sign the World Peace Treaty. Why? Because the universe is a peaceful place. That's the rule. It's a rule. This is the way the universe works, okay? Physical and emotional harmony and vitality is an essential part of the world peace. And so this is the truth. And as knowledge seekers, we find that truth, but do we have the courage to make a difference? So we all want to be patriots, and we all want the universal language of knowing, really. But is there a difference between a Canadian patriot or an American patriot or a Mexican patriot? Really? Is there a difference? I don't think so. You see, We all are seeking peace on earth. And so the plasma science, in order to be effective, needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on earth. We all have to know that difference. That's the end of the lesson. That's the end of the course and the basics of knowing. Thank you so much for letting me make this presentation.
Thank you very much, Alex. That was sure a lot of knowledge. Are you sure that was a basic teaching? Because that was a lot of knowledge to think about and contemplate. And I know one of the first steps is to becoming self-aware of the soul. And Mr. Kesh said in the Italian meeting that these religions and all these different variations have all been set up to hide us or hide the soul or hide the knowledge of the soul is within us. I don't know if they actually knew that or not, but it was all set up that way. Mr. Kesh started the 403 Knowledge Seekers Workshop the same way, in a way, where he read an article. Apparently there was an article in some newspaper and they were commenting on the store or something, and this is where the Messiah comes, the article said, to sell his products. And Mr. Kesh went on to explain that we are all messiahs of our own souls, and that these religions have been set up to take the soul of the man by building temples and churches and all these things. And he said that where they cash out your pocket as well as your soul. So I think one of the first things, and this technology is going to help us, is the end of religions, which Mr. Kesh had said is on the card in the very near future. I think this could be the last pope, and so on and so forth, as they come to realize that the game is up, so to speak, and they will take off the frock and the other things. But you've certainly given us a lot of things to think about. And isn't that where this loosh harvesting comes from? They're harvesting your energies in a way and keeping you from that awareness of your own soul. And to have the fear of God, which we're introducing technologies and showing there's no reason to be afraid of God. I've always had that when I was in the Christian religions, where the creator, according to the books, there always wanted something sacrificed or killed for him to feel right or him to feel appeased. And I just never understood why the creator would want to take life for him, or shedding of blood for him to feel appeased or to feel everything was made right in that manner. So thank you for such a beautiful and expansive teaching. I don't know if I can handle the intermediate one, but let's open up the floor and see if anyone has any thoughts or questions that they'd like to ask at this point in time. And if there's not any questions, I can, for a moment there while you're contemplating, hopefully you've written something down. I'll just share the screen for a moment, just to bring up the conference that Mr. Kesh has been invited to, and I'm assuming that he will still be attending. And this is a conference, I think, out in Las Vegas. And you can see we had one of the gentlemen here last week. We'll get back to you in a moment, Alex, but I just thought I'd give you a rest for a minute. And this is called the Cosmic Consciousness in Disclosure, and it's November 7th, the 4th to the 7th in 2021 at the hotel in Las Vegas. And I'm assuming Mr. Kesh will still be speaking there. I don't know if any of the plans change. But from what I gathered, a lot of these are just people who are still investigating, where we are getting right from the creator some of the real workings of the universe, and not having this guesswork and so on and so forth. So while you're warming your coffee, Alex, I just thought I'd mention this conference, that tickets are available. And I think let's see, it was the 5devents.com. So if you want more information, and I'm sure it'll be in the chat when Mr. Kesh is appearing there, so we can all join and listen to what he's delivering at that point, and of course support him. So are there any questions for Alex that has come out of this teaching? I know that when you said decay, Alex, that's something that I had always maybe related to tooth decay or a body decaying. But when we use decay, it just means a division or a splitting. And as you've explained, the splitting or the division of the neutron into the proton and the electron. So when you think of decay in this knowledge, you think of it as, I think, a division or a splitting into other parts of equal strength to itself.
Yes, Mark, definitely. And when we look at nuclear decay, the way it was explained to me when I was a kid, it might take 20 to 50,000 years, 20,000 to 50,000 years for nuclear decay to complete. So, you know, that was one of the hazards of the nuclear work. But as the nuclear industry has progressed, I would venture to say that it hasn't delivered what it's promised to do, and the destruction continues. So the creation of destruction is a form of creation, but the nuclear decay has been reduced now to, well, we can almost do that instantaneously now. And so man has continued to abuse his knowledge as a result.
Yes, and this should help us to move forward, because as the religious leaders step down, so to speak, and stop abusing the man for a lack of knowledge, this helps us where people have always looked to religion in a way, whether it was one system or another. Many people have gone on different religions and explored this one for a while and that one for a while, always trying to get to this position of completeness or complete understanding. But I think by them stepping down and us showing these systems, the Keshe Foundation, it will give man a beautiful direction to turn to and to understand actually how the universe works. So this is in the works right now, as I understand it, that this could be the last pope, or probably will be the last pope. And the others will follow.
And the other thing there, Mark, of course, is, and I've said it during the presentation, but I just want to emphasize again that the decay comes from something, and that something was created. So if in the one direction we have the decay, and that's the way physics has been expressed to us as a, you know, in a singular direction, and Mr. Keshe's teaching, it's bidirectional. And so not only is a decay on the one side, but there's a creation on the other side. So if we have a difficulty understanding how the nuclear decay works, you can understand why we have a difficulty in understanding how creation works. And so we have these limitations that are imposed on us. I want to also address one other subject. And as you know, I mentioned the word taboos. And so there are subjects that are taboo as far as I'm concerned. And they are firmly attached to loosh harvesting. And I think we all know what that means. And I don't really want to discuss it because it's a very depressing subject, and I can't believe that mankind is still engaged in that. But it is kind of the foundation of our self-serving attitude on this planet. But you know, we have imposed limitations. And of course, one of the most imposing limitations we have is on the limits of growth on this planet. And so we are faced with the potentials of starvation and not having enough to provide, and an overpopulation of the planet, and et cetera, et cetera. You know, North America is a very large continent, and we probably have about 450 million people. China is a very large continent, but it has 1 billion more, 1.4 billion people. So we really don't understand what overpopulation is here. And when you look at the Chinese society and you see how well organized it is, and it's embarrassing, because unless you're a world traveler, you're not exposed to this. So we don't know what's going on the other side of the universe. We're only looking at our little tiny perfect world. And I say it's embarrassing because, especially from a Canadian point of view, we are a great country, and I'm proud of Canada.
When you say gas does funny things, I was thinking of the GANs, and as it makes a nano of itself and appears as a solid in the matter state. And we do call GANs another dimension of matter, I think the fourth level of matter, or perhaps the fifth. But it does make a nano of itself and then appears as a solid in the matter state. So very interesting that we've learned how to convert fields into matter. And of course, you can GANs anything, as I understand it, not that I've GANs many things. I wanted to ask you about this royal society in a way where it sounds so official. You know, if something's printed in there, it must be true because it's royal. And how could you question anything with royalty in it? But now we're learning much, much more. And if any of you have had trouble with any of these teachings, just remember your soul has a double PhD in this knowledge. So if you become self-aware of the soul more and more, even though the soul does have its secret life, it doesn't really need the physicality to operate. But as you get closer to your soul, and we're all trying to do that, and I think these systems will help us achieve a greater level of interaction between the soul of physicality and the soul of the man, as we start to amalgamate these two souls into one.
So the assumption, of course, is that the Royal Society is a royal society, right?
That anything like a royal flush?
Yes, as a matter of fact. But that's poker lingo. The thing is, you have to look at the ownership of the Royal Society, and so this is a different kind of royalty. And you know, you find that out in the Roman Catholic Encyclopedia.
And of course, Mr. Kesh had some experiences by submitting his paper to the British, was it the Astronomical Society, and then found out his work was being pilfered by some top people in the world. And then, of course, after reading The Creation of Black Holes, certain scientists has actually changed their understanding and went forth and published it.
Well, certainly. Why build something when you can steal it?
And I'm very happy that we are ending this idea of the fear of God, because this has really done damage, I think, to so many people, not realizing that the Creator sits within us and our soul is built above and on top of the soul of the Creator. And we're all carrying this. And, you know, every time I've talked to a religious person, or even people that come to the door, I tell them that, you know, you're made, God said, I made the man in the image of myself, and they always disagree. They always disagree. And I could see the religious leaders disagreeing, because then you really don't need them anymore as an intermediary or someone to teach you so many things. When you realize that you are made in the image of the fields of the Creator, not so much with the 2 arms and the 2 legs idea. But if they go ahead and admit that, then you wouldn't probably be going to their buildings or temples anymore, because you are the Creator. And this is what we're going to find out as we continue to experience these systems and this technology that's being delivered for all of us, not just for some of us.
Mark, there's a lot of scratching on your microphone there, so something's going on. But the other thing is, you know, do we pay homage to God for a few hours on Sunday or whatever day your day of worship is? You know, what do we do the rest of the time? And, you know, does that actually excuse us? And so one of the examples that I would like to bring up is I was talking about the Lapsang Rampa's stories about in Tibet. And what's interesting is there's a lot of travelers and there's only one road through Tibet. And as they come into the capital, the entrance to the capital is lined with beggars. And I never knew that there was a decorum for beggars, but beggars know that they never borrow or beg from the same person twice or more. And so we find that beggars in North America are not as cultured or disciplined. But because Lapsang Rampa was able to, he was in training to be a Lama, and as such as a Lama can see the soul orientation, as he looked at the beggars and he looked at the travelers giving money to the beggars, and he commented to his mentor, but they are not poor. The beggars are not poor. So why are they begging? So the begging is their vocation, that is their job. Well, what purpose, excuse me. Sorry. What purpose is their job? Well, their job is to relieve the burden on the soul of the traveler. Because in order to be a traveler, that person has to have a wherewithal, a financial wherewithal. And how do they accumulate that financial wherewithal? So the beggar is actually providing a service where the burden on the soul, the guilt burden on the soul, is relieved by the traveler being able to give money to the beggar. Well, that's a fine how do you do. So really, the beggar doesn't really need the money. He's just providing a service to the traveler. And is that the best service that he can do? So really, his service is for the purpose of accumulating money. Because as a seer, as someone who can see the soul, Lapsang Rampa figured out that the beggar had a service to provide to the traveler. But the question was, does the beggar know about the service that he's providing? Or is the beggar looking for his own self-serving need to accumulate money? And so if you're going to accumulate money or steal money or beg for money, you're not going to beg from another beggar. You're going to beg from someone who has the money. And if the person who has the money doesn't want to donate it, well, we go one step further, don't we? Then we coerce them somehow through either blackmail or intimidation or terrorism or whatever. So, you know, there are all ways and means to liberate you from your money. And so in Canada here, we have a commercial about our financial freedom. It's called Freedom 55, which means that you have your financial freedom at the age of 55, because that's the normal thing you see in Canada, is to be able to retire financially at the age of 55, even though the retirement age is 65 here. But, you know, I had experienced my Freedom 55 where I was liberated from all of my money. And I never dreamt that that would be possible in a free country like Canada. So that was a rude awakening for me. And speaking of rude, that was another rude awakening for me, was I found out that in Canada, because Canada is such a wealthy, a wealthy country, it is rude to be poor. It is rude to be poor. So it is less rude actually to be a beggar, because at least you're doing something. But to be poor means that you have succeeded at failing, and that's not the Canadian way. And so that's how we treat our homeless and our deprived. And then we have the deceitfulness, where we have people who are not homeless and not deprived, but who are taking advantage of the beggar's position, where not only are they begging for money from people who could give money, shall we say, to people who really need it, but they're also leeching on the system. And the system, we call that feeding at the trough here. What do you call that in the US, Mark? What do you call that in the US?
I guess being on the government dole, so to speak, where you're getting handouts or something. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, well, especially, isn't it interesting in the last 2 years how those handouts have been coming out and who has been on the receiving end?
Yes, it's basically shown that the government can pay us to stay home and we still can get things done.
Yeah, but
that's one of the things it showed.
Who was the biggest benefactor? It was not the common man, Mark.
No, we know. Yes, we know.
Yeah. Okay. So there's something wrong. So not only are we financially bankrupt, but we are morally bankrupt. And that was the purpose of today's class, to demonstrate that. You can demonstrate that to yourself on your own. Wikipedia is there. Do the research, you will find out. And
but
may God bless you.
Yes, God bless you too. And this emotion of completion seems very exciting, and this is part of the processing, I think, that's going to go on within these units. Man has never really experienced this emotion of completeness, and we're being taught that in these systems, even when you're getting out of the system, but when you're in the system, you don't have that need. You say, I don't have a need for food. I don't have a need for wealth. And this completeness, this emotion of completeness, when you exit the system, apparently the food end of it could carry on with you for months. And maybe I'm understanding now how much of the agriculture maybe will not be used anymore, because if we go around into different areas and we can project these fields into a continent or into a population where you wouldn't have to eat very much over the next few months, and you have this feeling, this total complete feeling where your cells are absorbing from the universe, a lot of the food may be just people won't have to go for it as much anymore. And I think this is what we'll be able to do. He said if you spend time in here, you wouldn't, it will carry with you. So maybe some of the other things will also carry with you, where you're not going to go after the wealth. You're not going to need the warmth either.
So that's the other point of emphasis that I would like to put forward. And that is that, as you say, we've come to a completion point. It's an arbitrary completion point. And for me, that's kind of the extent of my knowledge. So I'm at the bottom of the barrel.
Did somebody just kick the bucket?
Yeah, that was,
like.
I gave my head a shake.
Okay. No problem.
So, we're going into uncharted waters. I'm going into uncharted waters. So, like, you really expect me to be here next week, don't you?
Well, I would like you to be here.
So how can I talk about things that I don't know anything about?
Well, we know no limitations, so you can, and your soul, nothing is hidden from the soul. So I would say your soul understands everything pretty thoroughly. And we just need to get into communication and a closer relationship with our soul. And I'm in the same boat where I need to do the same.
So you have to learn more things to teach more.
So I can assure you I will be here next week. That is my plan.
Well, maybe Alex, if you rattle that can a little more, someone can put some coins in it and make sure you're here.
I know there's a space on one of the corners of the street here. Good one,
I'm
Randy.
surprised with your excellent presentation today.
He
You didn't go in.
He
You
kicked
didn't
the
go in-
bucket. He kicked the bucket out. You didn't
No.
hear it?
I don't think
No
so.
more.
He's too tough. I'm surprised you didn't talk about Richard Hoagland and the face on Mars and connecting
no,
to
no,
the
no,
Sphinx.
No. No.
Oh, if you're
certain-
if you're gonna upset the apple cart, you might as well set it on fire too.
No. We
Keep
have
warm.
we have to be selective. We can't fight all the battles, and we don't want to fight all the battles. This is we're patriots, okay, and we have to get our planet back so that we can encounter our ultimate purpose, which is to engage with the universal community. Keep focused, and that will keep you on course.
Thank you for the excellent teaching today, Alex. I enjoyed every second of it. I pass the talking stick.